Hello and a very good morning to you. We're live in London. You're with Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson. Coming up, my guests will share their views on the week's biggest stories. Simon Brooke and Marta Lorimer. Welcome. Good morning. Simon, what have you spotted?
Well, the Sunday Times here in London is leading with Vladimir Putin's announcement last night that he wants to resume direct talks with Ukraine. Also, lots of coverage in the papers on this possible peace pact between Pakistan and India. In both cases, I suppose, the big question is, will they hold?
Thank you very much indeed for that. We'll get the latest from India and we'll enjoy an update from Norway.
I'm Lars Bevanger, Monocle's Oslo correspondent, and this morning I'm talking about a courtroom drama involving Norway's biggest track and field superstar, and why are Norwegians more stressed than their Nordic neighbours?
Plus, we'll hear from our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé, who's celebrating spring in Stockholm. It's the 11th of May, 2025. Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday.
Live from London, this is Monocle on Sunday with Emma Nelson.
And a very warm welcome if you've just tuned in. We just heard from Lars Bevanger in Oslo talking about how the Norwegians are more stressed than their Finnish counterparts. I am hoping, Simon Brooke and Marta Lorimer, that we are in a stress-free environment this morning. How are we? There's sunshine outside.
Yes, there is sunshine outside, and there's been a lot of sunshine going on lately in London. I don't recognise the city anymore.
No, it is strange, isn't it? There's
Very
walls, that big yellow thing. How about you, Simon? How's your week been?
Yeah, my week has also been very sunny. I have to say, I have this slight anxiety that we're going to have a really rubbish July and August here in Britain, and this is our summer. We'll look back. Do you remember that time back in May when we had 2 weeks of sunshine? Well, that was great, wasn't it? So I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. Let's hope we have a wonderful summer. But yeah, let's just, I suppose, enjoy it while we can.
We are a bare 2 minutes into the programme and we have weather anxiety. This is not a good thing. Let's cheer ourselves up by heading to Stockholm to join our editorial director, Tyler Brûlé. A very good morning to you, Tyler. I hope the sun is shining where you are.
Good morning, Emma. Yes, it is indeed sunny this morning, and this is also, they've had sort of a little hint of course, spring already, or something that looked like almost summer, and then it just became incredibly cold. So I landed here on Friday, and it was about sort of 3 or 4 degrees and kind of sleety and foggy. But the sun is out this morning, and I think it promises to be about 15 degrees. So there's your this side of the Baltic weather forecast.
Thank you for the weather update, but we're not quite yet putting the cashmere away.
No, absolutely. Well, actually, I am, because I'm heading to Bahrain in a couple of hours. So maybe there'll be cashmere in flight, but certainly not when I'm on the streets of Manama.
How is Stockholm this morning? Because, I mean, if we are further north, then spring is going to come a little later, isn't it?
It is. That's sort of the wonderful thing as you sort of climb up the latitudes at this time of year. It's sort of wonderful to have this complete repeat, because you have apple trees and of course cherry trees all in blossom. And it feels like probably like London did 5 or 6 weeks ago, like Zurich did, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Which is astonishing given the fact that we're not that far away. We're about a little bit over a month from midsummer, and the fact that you're still playing catch up over there with cherry blossom trees. Does there a sort of a sense of like the foot is massively put to the floor now in terms of a change of season?
Exactly, and that's also, you have to sort of remember, we're just about a little over a month away from the longest day of the year as well. So it was kind of curious. You've got this sort of chilly weather, places in bloom, and then of course you have this sort of rush to high summer. But of course, by the time the Swedes and the Finns, the Norwegians are celebrating, you're already sort of moving to the shorter side of the days as well. But definitely, of course, if the temperature is going to head towards the 20s here this week, then people are indeed going to go into high gear, summer madness already.
Wonderful, can't wait. So obviously there's a plane trip to Bahrain later, but what takes you to Stockholm this weekend? What is there to enjoy?
Well, I mean, more than anything else, this was not a work weekend. This was, well, it's always a work weekend, but it was a friend's birthday, one of those 50th birthday parties, which almost sort of seemed like a bit of a novelty when you sort of, on the kind of halfway to that other number. Like, oh wow, like, someone's turning 50, how quaint. But that was the evening yesterday with sort of much merriment. And I said it's always the amazing things though. Whenever, it doesn't matter whether it's it's a wedding, it's a graduation, it's a birthday party. My God, the Swedes love doing a speech. And it's not just one speech, it's not two speeches. It's like 7 speeches between every course, and there are hats and there are songs and all kinds of things. And it was interesting because we were sort of talking about this over dinner with, I think it was one of the only non-Swedes at the dinner, and they were trying to sort of get to the bottom of why as Swedes do we do this? Why are we so obsessed with making speeches? Because they said someone said they were at a British wedding recently. The father-in-law got drunk. And they were sort of, and he sort of made a sloppy speech, and they said it's so different that you just do not have that culture of sort of this sort of endless sort of festive speech merry-go-round that you get in Sweden. And I said I think it has something to do with the fact that there's no culture of parliamentary debate of public speaking in school. So I think by the time people graduate, by the time they get to their first parties, they just can't wait to stand up and have a bit of showmanship in front of their friends. So that's my read on it anyway.
What they probably don't quite factor in is that you're in the room and you're probably quite an acute judge of communications and presentations. And do you sort of sit there and dare I say, not to betray too many confidences, because clearly these are your friends that we're talking about, but when you go to an event and the Swedes stand up and do it, do you start sort of saying, your pitch wasn't quite there and you needed to get to your point and we needed a bit more about it? Do you end up sort of editorializing it a bit?
Yeah, editorial being the sort of the operative word. Yeah, you needed to trim that speech by about, a good 5 minutes. We would have been happy with 90 seconds, well delivered. Yes, it is true. But I think there is this sort of awareness, though, that maybe because of course, like everyone, you go to a wedding, people like to have a good dance, etc. And that idea of sort of being stuck beside the same person for 4 or 5 hours. I mean, no matter what you're doing, and no matter who's beside you, the conversation can wear a little bit thin. Anyway, I think maybe Sweden's up for a little bit of wedding public ceremony overhaul potentially.
Okay, we'll work on it. One thing that you wanted to draw our attention to is that the fact that, and I don't know how we sort of jump over to this, but Zara, the fashion brand, marks its half century. I mean, you were talking about how being a bit quaint if you hit your 50th birthday, but one wonders how Zara's going to have its birthday and whether there'll be lengthy speeches.
Well, I've found it sort of difficult to sort of miss all of the press releases. I don't know if you saw him at the end of the week. There was Zara's press team sent out this amazing both film and photo exhibition that they've done with Stephen Meisel and capturing also 50 of the world's biggest models from the last century as well. Of course, many that Zara had worked with, and no, it's curious to look at the power of that business. I think at a time when we sort of raise a lot of question marks about, can Europe sort of put forward big, muscular global brands in the face of all of the mega digital players in the US and elsewhere, probably at a time when Europe is sort of asking many questions of itself. And here you can go to A Coruña, on the tip of Galicia, and see this global powerhouse, which is remarkable to watch. I wanted to ask you though, are there more than 50 Zara items in Emma Nelson's wardrobe?
There used to be. And I don't really want to be too mean about Zara, but I'm going to be. They don't last very long. And so you get that lovely little buzz when you get something a bit fun and a bit interesting and a bit very quintessentially Zara, and then you wash it, and then you sort of maybe think that perhaps you don't need to go to Zara again, but yet it sort of draws you through the doors again. Zara is incredibly good at giving you that quick hit, and sometimes it comes up with absolute blinders. I've got a Zara coat. I think we've all got one or two things in our wardrobe that Zara just just scratches that right itch and continues to do so for a very, very, very long time. But if you want longevity out of something, possibly have second thoughts. What are your? Is there much Zara in the Brûlé wardrobe?
There is not. I think for menswear as well, it sometimes feels a little bit maybe on the young side. Of late, just given silhouettes, it feels a bit flappy. I always want to go in and buy something. Can I sort of find that Zara is like the place you go back to for the great white T-shirt, the great gray T-shirt, etc. But I don't find that there. What I think is remarkable though is what they've done with housewares, how they're working with Vincent van Duysen, making an amazing collection, which is also manufactured in Spain, which they need to be doing more of. I think. So I think when you look at actually what they've done with their home business, it's really remarkable. I think, and here standing in Stockholm, home of H&M, they've really, pulled way out in front of H&M Home. I think that's sort of a battle that has been won. But it's impressive, and I think it's amazing when you go to their world headquarters. It is just such a machine, both from not just in terms of putting clothing out, but from just the communication side, how they do photo shoots and video and everything. It's really sort of a world-class benchmark.
It's absolutely brilliant, and I now come to think of it, have more pieces of Zara Home in my house than I do have in the wardrobe. But the interesting thing is, because they have that discretion to it, and they're not sort of completely. There's a sort of almost a gentleness, dare you say, to the way that Zara Home sort of builds itself quite gently, but obviously is now on absolutely every single high street. What I can't get over, though, is the way that when you look at this campaign that they did to celebrate the 50th anniversary, and they had 50 amazing models all together with Stephen Meisel behind the camera, it suddenly stopped Zara from being a high street brand. It took it, when you look at it, almost akin to the cover of Vogue in the 1990s.
Absolutely, and I think that is one of the amazing things, of course. Marta Ortega, of course, who's running much of the show over there from the founding family, a very good friend of Stephen Meisel's. They also did an incredible exhibition in A Coruña last year, or year before last, actually, which was this incredible retrospective of Stephen Meisel's work. And I think you make an interesting point. You see Zara and the group, the Inditex group, the parent company, pushing into just interesting areas. So Massimo Dutti, of course, they're more upmarket brand based in Barcelona. They made developed the most incredible pavilion in Verbier this year, architecturally, almost like a small Barcelona pavilion on the slopes, cafe, shop, etc. So I think it's interesting to see that they're sort of creeping, you could say, almost northward in sort of the luxury stakes. I'm fascinated to see where does that company go next, and I get the sense that they're starting to back designers. They're also their own homegrown talent. So do we start to see this move by the group, and it could be in part by Zara, but I think just Inditex in general? Do they start to become a proper challenger to Mr. Arnault and LVMH?
Let's talk about travel. And you were talking about moving northwards there. You head to Bahrain, not northwards, completely the opposite direction. I want to know what's in the suitcase, how you're going to manage this one. Tell us what takes you to Bahrain, Tyler.
As this is very much work, and it's of course, I've been obviously spending a lot of time out in the UAE of late, and it's fascinating that there is this sort of admiration for Bahrain when you speak to people in Abu Dhabi, when you speak to people in Dubai, that Bahrain got there first, and they're almost at a point of maturity as a sort of mini powerhouse in the region, that they look at their heritage in a very interesting way. There is a respect for architecture from the 80s, even from the early 90s. There's that sense of sort of preservation, and what does it mean, of course, to be in many ways a very young country, but also how do you put in place the aspects and elements that, of course, you want to have there to ensure that. Yeah, as we even see sort of in daily life in London or in Zurich or in Milan, that a lot of contemporary architecture, it's not respected, and then before you know it, it's knocked down. But these, of course, are markers of time. So a little bit of a sort of a small heritage tour, meeting part of the architectural community, and also just seeing, is it a place for a potential Monocle Chiefs conference, or who knows? But I've only ever passed. I can remember many years ago working at wallpaper, heading off to Sydney on Gulf Air. I remember that the flight went, this was mid-90s. I remember the flight went Heathrow to Manama to Singapore, then on to Sydney. That was in the days, it's not that long ago that you had to do a double stop to get to Australia. So it was a pass through Bahrain then. So this will be sort of a proper 48 hours in the States before heading back to Paris.
And it's an interesting country insofar as it's pushing its tourism agenda incredibly hard. But given the fact that everybody else in that neck of the woods is doing the same thing. So it's where Bahrain markets itself and where it positions itself, which is key, isn't it?
Absolutely. This has been a week, of course, where we saw that Abu Dhabi announced that they're going to be building the first Disney World, the first Disney theme park in the region. You have Six Flags as a big U.S. brand going into Saudi Arabia. And it's just been fascinating to watch this race on the part of all of these big players in that grand entertainment space, seeing where they're going to pop up within the Gulf region. And that's one of the things I'm interested to sort of measure over the coming days is, what is Bahrain's pitch going to be? Because as you've said, oil prices are certainly under threat. You've got Dubai sort of sucking a lot of the air out of the room when it comes to just attracting talent. And when you're really a tiny state like Bahrain, where are you going to pitch yourself? What is going to be the type of tourism? And what is that offer? Is it a cultural one, or is it just that, okay, you've got fantastic chefs from around the world and you have lovely resorts, but of course it's a crowded space. You look what Saudi is doing, etc. So what is going to be their offer, to Europeans, of course, to the Indian subcontinent as well. So. Hopefully one to unpack in newsletters and discussions like this over the coming weeks, Emma.
And indeed, and possibly at the Badi Market in Zurich in a couple of weeks' time. Tell us about that.
Well, we had our Portuguese market yesterday and Friday evening in London. So we worked with Portugal Tourism, Midori House. The whole courtyard was full of Portuguese players and brands yesterday, and that's sort of I would say more established and also emerging makers and small ateliers as well. I got this sort of picture of this very happy looking woman with an empty table in front of her because all of her olive oil sold out just meters from you yesterday. Much of that same cavalcade will show up in Zurich 2 weeks. It's the Friday and Saturday 2 weeks out from now. But as you said, it's the Badi Market. It's really sort of the official start of the swimming season, even though, of course, all of the bathing clubs in Zurich are already open. But this is going to be the best terry towels from Portugal and everything else you would need to have a perfect summer weekend. So that's going to be happening at Dufourstrasse 90, number 90, 2 weeks from now.
We can't wait. Tyler Brûlé on the plane to Bahrain later on. Thank you so much for joining us on the line from Stockholm. Well, that's a busy couple of days in the world, from Stockholm to Bahrain. And the idea of actually looking ahead, planning ahead to the summer season. I think that, the enjoyable thing is that, like, up in Stockholm, they've got the doors open, the engine's running, off we go, here comes summer. Just the mention of terry toweling just sort of got me agog with delight that it might actually be laying down on a very beautiful sun lounger at some point. That sort of renewed spring in our step. Has anyone felt that yet? Because I think every conversation in the last 48 hours is, we can breathe. There's light, there's sun, there's a little bit of something. Apologies if you're listening in Australia. Sorry about this. But there is that sort of renewed sense of being able to do stuff and getting ahead and looking forward, isn't there? How about you, Marta? You're going into exam period though, aren't you, where you are?
Well, yes, I am. I just came out of marking season and I have exams coming at the end of the month. But before that, I have the wildest 10 days of the year ahead of me because I'm going to Paris over the weekend, then going from there to Helsinki, and then I'm going to Shetland. And the trip to Shetland is going to happen entirely sort of train and ferry based.
What's in Marta's suitcase?
That's what I have to figure out, and I don't know how to do it because this is 10 days in 10 fairly different places and for different reasons. So it's a mix of business and leisure. So I actually, it's going to be a nightmare, and I'm not looking forward to planning. But I'm looking forward to going there.
Because an evening dress in Helsinki isn't going to really cut it in Shetland. Or it might if you get the right one.
Oh, are we talking wool fleecy dress?
Maybe not in Helsinki, I don't know. How about you, Simon? Is there a sort of a spring in your step, garden-wise, work-wise, looking ahead to a better summer? One does feel as if one's been sort of trapped in a Tupperware box for about 10 months.
Yeah, a lot of people have been saying to me that they found the last winter really long and grim. I don't know whether it really was in terms of light and temperature and, meteorologically, but or whether it's just the political and geoeconomic situation which has made them feel like that. But certainly, yeah, I think the weather has a really profound effect on my psychology. I find it's ridiculous. I know that there's no difference between looking out of the window really if it's grey or if it's sunny, but somehow everything looks better in the sun, doesn't it? I think it must be a sort of animal thing, do you think, somehow, that affects us from years and millennia ago when we used to hibernate or something? But yeah, it really does make you feel better.
Indeed. And we crack out the lighter clothing as well, which is gorgeous. Right, let's have a look at the news. Where do you want to start? Simon, you mentioned before we came on air this astonishing thing that instead of agreeing to a 30-day unilateral truce, which is what all the European leaders were pushing for yesterday, Vladimir Putin's decided that he wants face-to-face talks with Ukraine on Thursday in Istanbul. Here we go. It's astonishing.
Yeah, it really is. And it's been widely reported in most of the newspapers around the world this morning, as you can imagine. I think I was slightly amused in a sort of grim way to read that Vladimir Putin wants to have this negotiation because apparently he wants to, quote, remove the root causes of the conflict. Well, that's him, isn't it? I mean, he started this whole thing. So, yeah, definitely up for that. Let's remove this awful root cause. Let's get rid of it. But I think really what he seems to be doing, I think the reason why he's doing this to a large extent is we've seen over the last few days across Europe and the US a real coalition forming. We've seen greater sort of integration amongst European and US leaders. We've seen them singing off the same hymn sheet. There's a much more of an interest in actually taking action here. And I just get the feeling that Putin is suddenly getting a little bit nervous and feeling that he has to do something. I mean, I cannot believe for a moment that he wants any kind of solution, really, because he has to keep this conflict going for his own political survival. But on the other hand, what he also needs to do is seem to be making the weather to taking the initiative and doing something about it. So personally, I would, given what we've seen already, I wouldn't put any stock in this latest move by Putin. But obviously, it is something that the West will have to react to.
And this root causes issue, Marta, is held to be what? A fear of a pivot towards the West and a pivot towards Europe? Because we need to think that before the invasion, before the annexation of Crimea, there were really strong moves by Ukraine to move towards the European Union one day.
Yeah, I think that Putin has several different root causes that he points to. One of the, I suppose, the meta causes is the idea that Russia has been humiliated by the West and that the West hasn't taken it seriously, and that this is almost a way for him to sort of to prove that they shouldn't be dismissing Russia and that its own interests should be protected, and particularly its interest in Ukraine, and in making sure that Ukraine doesn't pivot too hard towards the West. And it joining the European Union, and even more than the European Union, NATO, has been one of the key areas of concern for him. Now, he seems to be moving away from this position and saying, okay, it's fine if they join the European Union because we know that doesn't really, that's not really going to affect Russia's security specifically, but he still wants them to not be able to actually join NATO. I'm quite curious to see if the reason why he's showing himself more open-minded is because he's trying to buy himself some time, which seems likely, or if it because trying to deal with the Americans by himself has been so bad that he would rather try and deal with the Europeans, which I find to be also quite interesting as a development.
And we saw this week the celebrations, the commemorations in Russia when the Kremlin displayed its full military might for the rest of the world, and also for its own people, just to say, look, we can do this. But the difficulty that Russia now faces, though, is that although it is telling the whole world that it has the means and it has great plans to expand its armed forces, it is having to rely on the North Koreans to prop up its fight in Ukraine.
Yes, war is a costly thing, which is why most Europeans have been very reluctant to engage in it directly and have been saying, oh, well, we'll give money to the Ukrainians on our own terms. But this is something that has domestic costs for Putin as well, and he does need time to recoup.
And it is a difficult thing, isn't it? Now, Simon, when we look at the fact that, reports are that if you're living in Estonia, you're constantly, when you're on the border of Russia now, the European countries on the border of Russia are more than aware of the fact that the direct threat that comes from them.
In a way, I think it's ironic, of course, that Putin's long-term ambition is to challenge, perhaps defeat NATO in some way. And yet what we've seen, certainly along those northern European states, actually more of them have been joining NATO. And NATO itself has got this sort of second wind, hasn't it? This real force of energy behind it. And I do think one of the interesting things that we're seeing across Europe, whatever Europe's other problems in terms of the economy, in terms of dealing with a US which is no longer an ally but is in some ways a threat. What we've seen with the meeting of the French, UK, non-EU member, of course, and the German leadership as well, is, as I say, this close union, if you like, of the willing, as it's called. So in a way, it's interesting that Putin's long-term ambitions actually seem to be going in the opposite direction, and it's his fault. I think on the subject of the economy, let's forget that Putin has created a war economy. 40% of the country's wealth is devoted to external and internal security. So I think this is one reason why Putin cannot let this thing go. He's set up the whole country as one massive military defense facility, if you like. And so he's got to keep it going. And if at some point, he's forced to, or he decides to call a real truce with Ukraine and sign some long-lasting deal, then the problem is, of course, for many people in Russia, they're thinking, well, what was all that for? So what?
And we looked, let's just have a look at this trip to Ukraine yesterday, that we had a rather wonderful but slightly strange dynamic, didn't we, Marta, of we have Macron and we have Starmer, men who are rather compact, sitting next to each other, the two leaders of the coalition of the willing, chummy as you'd imagine, and yet this incredibly tall, strange man suddenly joined them, which was Friedrich Merz, the new kid on the block, the new boy in the party, sort of elected this week. They tested him first, but the role that Merz will now play in the coalition of the willing, do we know what it is?
Well, this is precisely what's going to be interesting about it, and what was so interesting about the fact that he wasn't voted as chancellor in the first try. So just earlier this week, Germany had to have a formal vote in the parliament on actually electing him as prime minister, selecting him as prime minister, if you wish, and he was supposed to have a comfortable majority. And he, in fact, fell short because at least 16 lawmakers that were going to be supporting him didn't vote in his favor. And that threw a bit of a spanner in the works, because if you had been following European politics the week before, everyone was saying, it's a done deal. Merz is going to come in. He's going to have a strong majority because he's going to be heading a coalition of only two parties. He will actually be able to push for a stronger European defense, and that vote basically means that that's going to be a bit more challenging for him to do, because someone in his coalition doesn't really support him.
Secret ballot. Do we know why? And do we know who actually tripped him up? Not really. There's a series of options. One is that this was people from within his party that don't like the fact that he is a bit too AfD friendly, so a bit too friendly with the radical right. They could also be people either from his own party or from the Socialist Party that didn't get a ministerial post,
or it could be people from the socialist bit of the coalition who are unhappy about his friendliness with the AfD.
Which is interesting. I read somewhere that, in terms of the way that things are done, that when you have to have a coalition, which is what the Germans have opted for, and it is generally speaking, so it has led to stability more than other forms of government, but everything is done on the sidelines as a result. So you don't ever have that face-to-face sort of clash resolution progress. You have an awful lot of whispering in corridors and quiet deal making, which doesn't necessarily make for a trustworthy system, does it?
Not really. I mean, I think it is a trustworthy system. I think the way that places that have coalition governments that are formed after an election function is that they say, look, we are all going to be running on our own programs. So what, in an ideal world, what we stand for. But we also realize that politics is about compromises. And this is why in sort of the post-election discussions, you actually talk to each other and you come together to a collective program that is going to be fairly stable over a longer time period. So it's just different ways of doing democracy. And I don't think that one is necessarily less stable than the other or less valid. This system has historically served Germany very well. And I think there's something to be said for consensus-driven cultures over the British adversarial model where everyone is just screaming at each other. And that's not necessarily being productive if everyone then does the exact same policies.
Simon, 3 decades in British politics, and how is the screaming?
The screaming continues. But I think what's interesting, if you look at the political institutions, really across certainly Europe, the UK, and the US, is they just don't seem fit for purpose anymore. And one of the things we're seeing, as you say, Marta, we have this adversarial two-party system in the UK, but it was widely noted that last year the Labour government won a whacking great majority in the House of Commons, but on the smallest share of the vote of any political party for 100 years. So a real mismatch between the representation in the House of Commons and how people felt. And now, of course, we've had the rise of reform, which is questioning that even more. So I think real questions about the way British politics is run. And what's interesting is, even on the right, the Conservative Party, which has always been very strongly opposed to any kind of proportional representation, very keen on the first past the post system because it's worked well for them. I'm talking to party leaders, within the leadership, who are wondering whether some kind of proportional representation system, and there are so many on offer, of course, but whether some kind of PR actually could help the Tory party and in some way, as you were saying, produce a government representation in Parliament which is more accurately reflects the way people feel. But it's a real problem, I think. And again, in the US, we're seeing questions there, aren't we, with the Trump administration about how this, beacon of democracy is responding.
Yeah, I think France is having a similar conversation right now about introducing proportional representation precisely because they feel that the system isn't really serving them well. A lot of voters feel like that they are not represented. I wonder how much tinkering with an electoral system is going to solve the problem in a way, because some of the problems of politics don't really come from just the issue of representation. It's about what those representatives can actually do once they are in power. And that is not something that you are going to solve via a more representative parliament. You are going to need a different form of politics, I suppose.
Possibly. And then also the question is exactly if you do have those negotiations, does a small but extreme party end up, the tail wagging the dog? They're overrepresented because they managed to do a deal with the larger party, which gives them something they want, which might have only be of minority interest. And then, of course, I always think with whatever the makeup of the parliament and the government, at the end of the day, taxes are going to have to go up or down. Do you know what I mean? You can't please all of the people all the time. You still got to make some really difficult decisions that are going to upset a lot of the voters.
It's 9:34 here in London. Let us head now to our Oslo correspondent, Lars Bevanger. A very good morning to you, Lars. How are things where you are?
Things are very, very well, and people are excited, or if that's the right word, about the news coming up in next week, where we go into the final few days of the court case that has captivated the population. It is about some of Norway's biggest sports superstars. You probably have heard of Jakob Ingebrigtsen, track and field champion, twice Olympic champion. Now, he and his younger sister have accused their father, who's been their coach throughout their lives and careers, for emotional and physical abuse. And he denies all charges. But this is now coming to a head on Thursday next week, and the population seems to be quite split in their support for the two. But there's been some quite harrowing evidence being heard in court.
Indeed, I mean, this is all about the father who coached the children, who then obviously went off to sort of like global fame and Olympic golds and world record and world championship medals as well. And the argument is by the defence that the father, Gert, was nothing more than a very strict father. The strange part of this is that evidence from their sort of Kardashian-style fly-on-the-wall reality TV series has suddenly taken become a pivotal part of this court case.
That's right. So they've had this documentary running for 5 series on the state broadcaster NRK. So people in Norway feel they really know this family, and it's a very special family, obviously, for the reasons that the 3 of the sons are hugely successful globally. They have 7 children. Gert, the father, has been coaching pretty much all of them who have been trying to break into sports. But the series has been played in court mainly for the defense, saying that, look, he's just a strict coach, but also a loving father. Meanwhile, the son Jakob and his younger sister have said that, well, we felt safe when the cameras were present because he would then moderate his behavior. So that's where things stand.
Okay, let's move on to a story about the Norwegian oil fund. It's a sort of a hardy perennial when it comes to news. What's the latest?
Well, it's a bit of a 3-pronged story this week. The oil fund has long been ruled by an ethics committee with rules laid out by the Norwegian Parliament, which basically owns the fund. The fund is not allowed to invest in certain companies that are deemed unethical. So, for instance, tobacco. Now, though, there is pressure for the fund to open up for investment in big arms manufacturers that are also involved in nuclear weapons. They've currently not allowed to do this, and we're talking about big companies like Airbus, Boeing, Lockheed Martin. And the argument is that it is time for the fund to invest in these companies now that Europe, in particular, needs to ramp up their military spending, and in the face of Russian aggression and all the global threats, the fund needs to look at this again.
And let's finally move on to a story about, I don't know, how happy are you as an individual, Lars? I do that, obviously, ask that question out of the kindness of my heart, but also there's a wider journalistic issue brewing here.
There is. So I am Norwegian, and there's a new health report. They've been looking at the health of the Nordic people, and they've found out that we Norwegians are more stressed. We have more long-term stress than any of our Nordic neighbours, and which I find a bit interesting, because Norwegians are usually seen to be quite happy. We have incredibly high standards of living, of course, but it turns out the Finns are far less stressed than us, which is something that Norwegians will probably find strange, because Finns, the caricature of a Finn is someone who's quite gloomy and maybe a little bit depressed, but apparently no, they're much happier than us. And I think, well, the report says that Norwegians are more worried about their work-life balance. They want everything now because they know they've got a lot of money, they've got a beautiful country, so they should be happy, but apparently they're not. Whereas the Finns seem to be a bit more they've resigned themselves to what they've got and find that good enough. So they have a lower level of long-term stress, it would seem.
I mean, when you talk to your Norwegian friends and family, do you generally get a feeling that there is a sort of an underlying amount of stress, or are you just a quite a happy lot?
Well, speaking for my own family, we're a pretty happy lot. But then I think it's probably more a case in the slightly younger generation of people with young families. There is a lot of expectation that you follow up your kids, you leave work early to pick them up in kindergarten, but also at the same time you're expected to succeed at work. So I can see certain what people talk about this. They're running out of time all the time, basically. I haven't got time to do everything and be successful both at home and at work. So I can see where this report is coming from, and it is interesting to think that, because I mean, people around the world think that the Scandinavians are very, very happy. And it seems that there are some underlying issues that might need to be worked on.
Lars, we're passing our concerns on to you and your country. Thank you so much for joining us on the line. That was Lars Bevanger. Simon, you were nodding when we were talking about the idea of that Scandi happiness, that contentedness with life, which I can never quite understand because it is so dark and cold. But and I need light and warmth. And those sort of moments of total extreme that you experience when you are in Scandinavia, especially if it's sort of December and you know that you're just not going to see the sunlight at all. And yet everybody seems to be so contented with their lot.
Perhaps they're just used to it. I have to say, I think it would make me slightly manic, I think, because in the summer I would be bouncing off the walls 23 hours a day. And then the winter I'd just be in bed all day. But no,
Simon,
they must be used to it.
you're the most mild-mannered person I've ever met.
Oh, thank you. And that's what we associate with the Nordics and the Scandis, don't we? So perhaps they react against that. I remember the first time I went to Sweden, I was in Gothenburg and I got a taxi, and I actually was paying by cash because this was before the days of cards or whatever. And I, of course, as you do when you have the foreign currency, only had a big note, and I gave it to the cab driver, sort of slightly anxious, and he went, "Do you have anything smaller?" And I went, "No, I'm really sorry, I haven't." "Oh, don't worry, it's my fault, I should have some more change." I thought, are you being sarcastic? Because I was so used to a black cabbie in London who was so rude and unpleasant, and this guy, or not always but very often, and this guy was so incredibly nice. So I just thought, gosh, what an amazing place.
The generosity of spirit. The Italian in the room, Marta, Lorimer.
Yes. No, I mean, Scandinavia is such a fascinating place to me. I was in Oslo in February, so I have this very strong sense of it being very dark very soon. What I'm just wondering, and I don't think I could cope with it because like you, I also need sunny and warm, which doesn't really explain why I live in London.
Or either of us live in London.
But I do find it a little bit less miserable. What I wonder about these statistics is whether they're calculating this as an average over the year, because it would make a lot of sense to me that during the summer you are extremely happy, and then in the winter you're absolutely miserable. But those will sort of even themselves out over the year. But yes, so many thoughts.
Let's head to India now, because a fragile ceasefire between India and Pakistan seems to be holding. The truce was brokered by the United States. There were moments of concern in the last few hours when clashes have been reported shortly after the ceasefire came into effect. The truce aimed at preventing the worst clashes in decades between India and Pakistan from escalating into an all-out war. Joining me now is Lyndee Prickitt, Monocle's New Delhi correspondent. Good afternoon, Lyndee.
Hello.
Good to have you with us. So we had the ceasefire declared in the last few hours, and then immediately after that there were clashes. But by and large, we have a sense of stability and things holding.
Yes, I think the favorite cliche is tense calm. There's definitely a lot of what you might call post skirmish commentary, everybody digesting what's been happening, what did happen. For many, doom scrolling has taken on a whole new level here, with people glued to their phones and TVs for the past 4 days, finding it difficult to get work done and to get life done as they were trying to find out what was happening, to parse rumor from reality. And now, as I say, there's this sort of after effect of digesting the local, the regional, and the international opinions and reflections too, trying to see, is there a new world order? There are some who are saying that this was possibly a beta site, a beta sort of testing site for major arms manufacturers to see who's come out best here as different manufacturers' products were going head to head in the air over the borderlands of India and Pakistan. So there's a lot of debriefing trying to figure out how the chips have fallen. This is a country of highly news-hungry people. I've said it before, newspapers are read by people here across the classes and demographics. You see everybody on the street with their paper in the morning. And people are talking about nothing but this, from the chai or tea stalls to dining rooms, chic bars. This has been the main conversation that everyone is chewing over.
And how reliable is the information? Because there are reports that the more extreme unreliability of what's being posted online is becoming a real problem here, that the reliability of any narrative or anything that you see pop up on your phone is to be deeply questioned. And as a result, you risk disinformation fomenting further tensions which lead to something more serious.
For sure. And I have to say, I think it's a testimony to Indians and Pakistanis to have remained, the citizens, to have remained as calm and cool under pressure as they have. I mean, we're living in new times. The rumor mongering is crazy. You probably know that India, while it didn't directly shut down 8,000 X or Twitter account, it did ask Twitter to block access to these accounts in India, following executive orders from the Indian government. Now, a lot of people, of course, have said this is a horrible infringement on free speech. But the government says this was a decision to avoid further catastrophe with rumors going crazy, and things can spark really quickly. There is a lot of natural restraint, but if rumors go too fast and people think that there's violence that is untoward, then the worry is how that will escalate. So that was why that measure was taken with X. There's also a panoply of news organizations, from digital to print and TV, that go from all levels and all spectrums on the playing field here, and watching them is often a mind-blowing experience, we can say. But as I say, I think it's been amazing, the natural sort of desire for de-escalation. Of course, that's also been a very political hot point in social media, with many people saying, hey, this is India's chance to show Pakistan for once and for all to stop, in their words, as some people believe, aiding and abetting attacks on India. And so this is the chance to go for it. So there's a debate about de-escalation, with many people saying they thought they think that it was India's chance to go a bit harder. But there's loads of other people who are saying this is a true testimony to who we are, and how people in South Asia on both sides of the border can show restraint in the times of real extreme. Remember, we've been here before.
Exactly. And we need to remember this. And this is something which is absolutely at the forefront of any commentary. If you speak to anybody from India, anybody from Pakistan, there is plenty reason from both sides to have an awful lot of discontent. This ceasefire, one wonders, is holding for now. But the fact remains is that all that resentment and all that rivalry has bubbled right up to the top, and nobody wishes to back down.
Absolutely. And especially when reminded, as many people will, that it was 26 mostly Hindu tourists who were shot in Pahalgam and up in Kashmir, and that has hurt people, and they feel that India is too vulnerable and it needs to put an end to this. I think one thing is for sure, that this feels really different with new lines being drawn. The Indian government under Modi, many are saying, has redefined the limits of tolerance with Pakistan. There's a new doctrine of deterrence. They've said that there's a zero tolerance policy. India has signaled that any further provocations will lead to swift and decisive retaliation. And it's also been very clear to say that if there are any more terror attacks, that happen in India, that will be seen as an act of war, and that is a new line. I don't know if it's in the sand or if it's in concrete, but it's definitely a new line that's been drawn.
The interesting thing is that the Americans arguably brokered this deal. Al Jazeera is reporting that there are the prospect of trade sweeteners if they keep the guns silent, and this is an astonishing state of affairs, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. India has acknowledged that the ceasefire was mediated by the U.S., and we know it was announced by U.S. President Donald Trump. India's External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar, has confirmed the ceasefire agreement while reiterating India's firm stance against terrorism. And it seems like these, as you say, are they sweeteners, or are they just a way of trying to paper over some cracks? India feels itself very much a country on the up. It was hurt by the idea of the tariffs, although kind of felt like maybe it got a slightly better deal than many other countries. And is this something that it can use and pivot off of? I just heard somebody today say, look, at the end of the day, we're a nation of shopkeepers. The business is what matters. And if we can do a good deal, we will do a good deal, because at the end of the day, we want to just get on with life. That's one view. I think that if there's a tariff sweetener that comes out of it, I think a lot of people are saying, well, the proof is in the pudding. Let's see what really happens, and let's see how the ceasefire holds. That's the other big thing.
Lyndee Prickitt in New Delhi, thank you so much for joining us on the line. You're listening to Monocle on Sunday with me, Emma Nelson, in the studio, Simon Brooke and Marta Lorimer. What do we want to talk about next? I think it might be quite nice to talk about the Pope.
Why not?
Because we talked about, Friedrich Merz and his uncomfortable election and the fact that people were sort of pushing and pulling around. I was reading an interview with the Cardinal Vincent Nichols, who's a 79-year-old British cardinal and was in the conclave. Exciting. And of course, they're not allowed to tell us anything, so they tell us bits. And the bit that he said he found it tremendously peaceful. Which, I mean, is frankly, if you're going to be in if your office is the Sistine Chapel, you've got quite a nice view. But the idea that something like that could be done peacefully and no backstabbing, how much we believe of this is something else. But the idea of a sort of a peaceful election of rather a glamorous Pope as well. He's got the kit back on after Pope Francis.
No backstabbing? Have you heard about how conclaves work? No, I mean, to me, this is fascinating because, as you mentioned earlier, I'm Italian. So the election of the Pope is, I would say, about as important as the election of the President of the Republic. But less
more so, one would imagine, because it lasts longer.
Probably more so because it does last longer. This is an elected leader until death. But it's been sort of really fascinating to notice how over the years, I suppose the politics behind the conclave have been more visible, and how some of the considerations that we might be able to see, which is, this idea of, the Pope has to be a bridging figure and you need to give something to the moderates, but also something to the more radical people in the church, and how radicals within the church are quite different. You can have the more conservatives, and then you can have, the more, let's call them left-wing radicals. I don't think that's the right term for it. But how you get all these really different currents that need to be somehow mediated, along with the concern that is very real for the Vatican right now that they need money. Because apparently one of the issues with Pope Francis is that they had a serious fall in donations, particularly from the US, because Pope Francis was being a little bit too woke. And how they've also had to sort of deal with these kind of concerns in selecting someone. And then you have the Italian news media reporting that the problem with the Italians, the reason they didn't win, is because they were all chatting amongst themselves instead of speaking in English to all the others, who anyway all speak really good Italian. So I just enjoy seeing also the reporting on this.
It is absolutely marvellous to watch. And the idea that we sort of pass judgment very, very quickly on Pope Leo, that he has to hit the tone absolutely perfectly from minute one, doesn't he? I mean, we already noticed a change in robes, obviously, because Pope Francis had, he espoused the more modest way of living. But then it was noted yesterday that a speech he delivered was written down, whereas Francis improvised, or indeed, just did it from memory. And so we're already looking at a sort of a slight change in direction. And people are sort of wondering, actually, is this a good thing? I mean, he even talked about the fact that he chose his name because of Pope Leo XIII, who was very much committed to the poor and the underprivileged during the first industrial revolution. He went straight to saying we're now living in the same times with AI. This is a really sort of interesting moment for him.
It's interesting, I think, as well, the way reading the signals as well, like you say, with the regalia, with the robes, very traditional. And yet, of course, he, as you also say, has been very vocal on workers' rights, on social equity and things, and minimum wage and issues like that. And Pope, his predecessor as Leo, wrote this encyclical talking very much about how industry and business has to be compassionate as well as successful, or whatever. And there's already questions about whether did he attack J.D. Vance? Is he going to be rude about the Trump administration? But I mean, the other thing that I found interesting about him as well is that it's been unearthed just yesterday, Friday and Saturday, that he said some quite unkind things about gay people. So what he describes as gay lifestyle, as a gay man, I'm thinking, well, that's not a lifestyle. That's who I am. And I think one of the things I found particularly difficult, because I was really excited about him up to this point until because I just thought, here's somebody who is, not only is he a first, he's American, which has this sense of renewing and refreshing, but he did seem like a really interesting guy. He still does, but I was also disappointed that he particularly chose examples from the media of same-sex families who had relationships. So what he was saying was, if two men or two women come together, they want to start a family, they want to look after their children, bring them up, love them, nourish them, nurture them, then it's not good if it's a same-sex couple, which to me sounds really unkind. So for me personally, I think the jury is very much out on him, but I'm very much conscious of the fact you get this. Obviously there's the spiritual element, there's prayerful, there's following Christ, whatever. On the other hand, he is also a politician in some ways. He has to keep this massive, diverse organisation of 1.4 billion Catholics on side somehow. He has to make sure that the donors keep giving money. He has to make sure that the Curia are backing him. So fascinating in terms of how he'll walk that tightrope.
Indeed. I mean, these comments that he made were in 2012, and one wonders whether Pope Francis may have pushed the narrative in a different direction, which may not mean that he gets as much cash from the Americans, but it may mean that actually he may be a slightly more palatable and relevant Pope, because he has to be relevant. And, he's 69, is that correct?
69.
So he's got a few miles in him.
But the other problem, of course, he has, and we're seeing this in the Anglican Communion as well, is that the real growth areas are South America, Africa, the developing world. This is where, as I say, the growth engine for the churches, and goodness knows they need this kind of growth. But on the other hand, A, these people don't have an awful lot of money to give, which is one practical problem, and B, they are very much anti-LGBTQ+, anti-women, women's rights and things. So that might go down well in some areas of the world, but across Europe and a lot of the US, that is just going to make the Christianity, the Catholic Church, the Anglican Communion look out of touch and make it even less appealing to people in these different areas.
We'll have to leave it there. Simon, Brooke and Marta, Lorimer, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. Thanks also to Lars Bevanger, Lyndee Prickitt and Tyler Brûlé. Thanks to the producers, Desiree Bandley and Mariella Bevan. Our studio engineer was Mariella too. I'm Emma Nelson. Monocle on Sunday is back next week. But until then, enjoy the rest of your weekend. Goodbye. Thank you for listening.